We've decided it's better if you don't come to the family reunion this year. You know how you get at these events, awkward, saying the wrong things, making people uncomfortable. It's just easier for everyone if you sit this one out. We'll send you photos afterward. My mother's voice on the phone was casual, matter of fact, as if she was discussing something as mundane as what to bring to a potluck rather than telling me I was being excluded from a family event. Again, this wasn't the first time I'd heard some variation of this message, and it wouldn't be the last. But this particular call, coming 2 weeks before my 25th birthday, after I'd already requested time off work to attend the reunion, hit differently than the previous exclusions. Because this time, I finally understood what was actually happening. This wasn't about me being awkward. This wasn't about protecting me from uncomfortable social situations. This was about my family being embarrassed by me and choosing their own comfort over including their daughter and sister in family events. I was silent on the phone, processing this familiar rejection, when my mother continued, "Jordan will be there with his new girlfriend and we want to make a good impression on her family. And Sarah's bringing her fiancé's parents. You understand, we need everyone to be on their best behavior, and you know social situations aren't really your strength." "My strength," I repeated flatly. "Mom, I'm a research scientist. I present at conferences in front of hundreds of people. I teach graduate-level courses. I've been interviewed by national media about my work. I'm perfectly capable of navigating social situations." "That's different," my mother said dismissively. "That's your work where people have to be professional. Family events are different. People can be more honest, and honestly, sweetie, you can be a bit much. You talk about things that are over people's heads. You don't pick up on social cues. You make things awkward. We just think it's better for everyone if you skip this one." Better for everyone. Meaning better for her and my father and my siblings who didn't want to be embarrassed by their weird, socially awkward daughter and sister who studied climate science and talked about things that weren't interesting to them. But before I tell you what happened when I finally stopped accepting these exclusions and started building a life so successful that my family eventually came crawling back, and how I responded when they did, you need to understand how we got to this point. How a family can systematically exclude and diminish one of their own for years, and how that exclusion can paradoxically become the thing that frees you to become exactly who you were meant to be. My name is Dr. Alex Chin, and I'm 32 years old now. But the story I'm telling you starts when I was 10 years old, when my parents first started using the phrase, socially awkward, to describe me, and when I first started noticing that I was being treated differently from my siblings. I was the middle child of 3, my older brother Jordan, who was athletic and charismatic and effortlessly popular, my younger sister Sarah, who was bubbly and social and could charm anyone, and me. I was the one who preferred reading to parties, who asked too many questions about how things worked, who got intensely focused on topics that fascinated me and wanted to talk about them at length even when other people were clearly bored. In other words, I was probably neurodivergent, possibly on the autism spectrum, possibly ADHD, possibly just highly intelligent with intense interests. My parents never had me evaluated because that would require acknowledging that I was different rather than just difficult. So instead, they labeled me awkward and embarrassing and spent my childhood and adolescence trying to minimize my visibility in social situations. It started small. At family gatherings, my parents would steer me away from conversations with relatives, afraid I'd say something weird. If I started explaining something I was passionate about, like how ecosystems worked or what I was learning about astronomy, my father would interrupt with, "Nobody wants to hear about that," or my mother would physically guide me away from the group with a forced laugh and an apology to whoever I'd been talking to. By the time I was a teenager, the pattern was firmly established. Jordan and Sarah were the kids my parents proudly showed off. I was the one they tried to hide, or at least manage, minimizing my presence and keeping conversations surface level so I wouldn't embarrass them with my intensity or my interests. High school was brutal. My siblings thrived socially while I struggled to connect with peers who didn't share my interests. My parents' response wasn't to help me find my people or celebrate my academic achievements. It was to express disappointment that I wasn't more normal like Jordan and Sarah. Every parent-teacher conference ended with my parents looking pained when teachers praised my intelligence and work ethic, as if academic success was less valuable than social popularity. When college acceptance letters arrived, I'd gotten into multiple top-tier universities with significant scholarship offers. My parents' response was tepid at best. When Jordan had gotten into a decent state school on an athletic scholarship 2 years earlier, they'd thrown a party and called all their friends. When I got into MIT with a full ride, my mother said, "That's nice," and my father made a comment about how I'd probably struggle socially at such a competitive school. They were more enthusiastic about Sarah making the cheerleading squad than they were about me getting into one of the best universities in the country. I went to MIT anyway, and it changed changed my life. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence and curiosity over social performance. I found my people, other intense, passionate, brilliant students who wanted to talk about complex ideas and didn't think I was weird for caring deeply about climate science and ecosystem preservation. I thrived. I graduated with honors, went directly into a PhD program, published research that got attention in academic circles, and eventually accepted a position as a research scientist and professor at a major university. I was building the life and career I'd dreamed of, surrounded by colleagues who respected and valued my work. But my family, they barely acknowledged any of it. My PhD graduation, they didn't attend because it was too far to travel. It was a 4-hour drive. My first major publication in a prestigious journal. My mother said, "I'm sure that's impressive to people in your field," in a tone that made clear she wasn't one of those people. My first grant funding of $2 million for climate research. My father asked if that meant I'd finally be able to afford to fix myself up a bit because apparently my success was less important than my appearance. And the family exclusions continued. Every holiday, every reunion, every major family event, there was always a reason why it was better if I didn't attend or if my attendance was minimal and carefully managed. The conversation will be too loud and chaotic. You won't enjoy it. Uncle Mike is bringing his business partners and we need to make a good impression. It's at a country club and you know how uncomfortable you are in those settings. We're taking family photos and we already have the groupings planned. It would be complicated to add you now. Always a reason. Always framed as being for my benefit or for practical considerations. But always resulting in the same outcome. I was excluded while Jordan and Sarah were centerpieces of family celebrations. By the time I was 25 and receiving that phone call about being excluded from yet another family reunion, I'd spent 15 years watching my siblings' lives be celebrated while mine was merely tolerated. I'd missed graduations and birthdays and holidays. I'd spent Thanksgiving alone in my apartment eating takeout while my family posted photos of their celebrations on social media. I'd watched Jordan's wedding via video call because I probably wouldn't enjoy the crowded reception even though I desperately wanted to be there in person. And I'd convinced myself it was fine. I had my work, my colleagues, my research. I didn't need family validation. I was building something meaningful regardless of whether they acknowledged it. But that phone call about the reunion, coming after I'd specifically requested time off and told them I was coming, finally broke through my denial. This wasn't about my comfort. This wasn't about practical limitations. This was about my family being embarrassed by me and choosing their own social comfort over including me in their lives. "Alex, are you still there?" my mother asked when I'd been silent too long. "I'm here," I said quietly. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetie. If I was the kind of person you wanted me to be, if I was more like Jordan or Sarah, would you be excluding me from the reunion?" There was a pause. "That's not a fair question, Alex. You are who you are. That's not an answer. Would you be excluding me if I was different?" Another pause. "The reunion will be better for everyone this way. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but it's the truth." "Okay," I said. "I understand. Can I also tell you something true?" "What?" "This is the last time you get to exclude me from anything. Not because I'm going to force you to invite me. I'm not interested in forcing my presence on people who don't want me there. But because from now on, I'm excluding all of you from my life. Permanently. You've spent 15 years making it clear I'm an embarrassment to this family. So I'm done being embarrassed. I'm done being managed and hidden and excluded. I'm done caring whether you're proud of me or accept me. You're all officially uninvited from anything I ever do in my life going forward. Goodbye, Mom." I hung up before she could respond. And then I blocked all their numbers, my parents, my siblings, extended family members who participated in or enabled the exclusion over the years. I blocked them on social media. I changed my email address and didn't give them the new one. I created a clean break from people who'd proven over 15 years that they didn't value me or want me in their lives. And then I did something I'd never allowed myself to do before. I stopped trying to make my family proud and started building the life I wanted without any consideration for their opinions. Over the next 7 years, I became someone my former self wouldn't have recognized. Not because I changed fundamentally. I was still intense and passionate about my work, still more comfortable with research than small talk, still the person my family had labeled awkward. But I stopped apologizing for it. I stopped shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. I stopped caring whether my interests were appropriate for social situations or whether my success made people feel insecure. I published groundbreaking research on climate resilient strategies that got international attention. I wrote a book for general audiences about environmental science that became a surprise bestseller. I gave a TED Talk about innovative approaches to ecosystem preservation that went viral with over 50 million views. I founded a research institute focused on practical climate solutions that attracted top scientists from around the world and got featured in major media outlets. I became exactly the person I was capable of being when I wasn't wasting energy trying to be someone my family could be proud of. And then, 7 years after cutting off my family, something happened that made my carefully constructed separate life and their life collide in a way I hadn't anticipated. I won the MacArthur Fellowship, often called the Genius Grant, a $625,000 award given to people who show exceptional creativity and promise in their fields. It's one of the most prestigious awards in science and academia. The announcement was public and widely covered in national media. My face was on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, "The Climate Scientist Giving Us Hope." My TED Talk got recirculated with millions of new views. My book shot to the top of bestseller lists. My research institute became one of the most talked about environmental organizations in the country. I was everywhere, doing interviews on national television, speaking at international conferences, being recognized as a leader in my field. And I was doing all of it under my full name, Dr. Alex Chin, which meant anyone who knew me could easily find the coverage, including my family, who I'd had zero contact with for 7 years. The messages started coming through every channel they could find. Professional email addresses I couldn't block without impacting my work, messages through colleagues who didn't know to screen them, even a letter sent to my workplace. All variations on the same theme. "We're so proud of you. We always knew you'd be successful. We've been following your career. We'd love to reconnect. Can we schedule a call? We miss you." The audacity was breathtaking. They'd spent my entire life making me feel like I was embarrassing and awkward and unwanted. They'd excluded me from 15 years of family events. They'd made clear through consistent action that I was someone to be hidden and managed rather than celebrated. And now that I was publicly successful and nationally recognized, they wanted to reconnect and claim pride in my achievements. The final straw came when they showed up at my home. My parents, Jordan and Sarah, all appeared at my door one evening, unannounced and uninvited, with smiles and a bottle of wine and casual assumption that of course I'd welcome them back into my life now that I was someone worth acknowledging. I stared at them through the doorway. These people who'd shaped so much of my early pain and insecurity, who'd made me believe I was defective rather than just different, who'd chosen their own comfort over including me in family for my entire youth. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice flat and cold in a way that made them falter. "We came to see you," my mother said brightly, "to congratulate you in person on the MacArthur Fellowship. We've been trying to reach you but we haven't heard back, so we thought we'd surprise you with a visit. Can we come in?" I looked at each of them, my mother with her expectant smile, my father looking slightly uncomfortable, Jordan appearing confused about why I wasn't immediately welcoming them, Sarah bouncing on her heels with performative excitement. "No," I said simply, "you can't come in, and you need to leave." The smiles faltered. "Alex, don't be like this," my father said. "We're your family. We want to celebrate with you. Where were you when I got into MIT?" I asked directly. "Where were you at my PhD graduation? Where were you when my first research paper was published, or when I got my first grant, or when my book came out, or when my TED Talk went viral? Where were you for any of the achievements I actually needed family support for?" "We didn't realize those things were so important to you," my mother said weakly. "You didn't realize getting into MIT was important? Publishing research was important? You didn't realize those things might warrant the same enthusiasm you showed when Jordan made varsity football or when Sarah got accepted to a state school with mediocre grades? Or is the truth that you did realize they were important but you didn't care because I was the embarrassing child you'd rather hide than celebrate?" Silence. They couldn't argue with that because we all knew it was true. "Let me be very clear," I continued, my voice steady and calm despite the rage I felt underneath. "You don't get to show up now that I'm successful and publicly recognized and pretend you've always been proud of me. You don't get to claim any part of my achievements after spending my entire life making me feel like I was defective. You excluded me from every family reunion for being too awkward. You told me not to come to holiday celebrations because I'd make people uncomfortable. You didn't attend my graduation because it was too far to travel. You've spent 25 years making it clear I was someone to be ashamed of. So now that I'm someone you're not ashamed of anymore, you want back in." "No, that's not how this works. We made mistakes," my father acknowledged, though his tone suggested he thought I was overreacting. "But we're family, Alex. Family forgives and moves forward. Family shows up," I corrected. "Family supports each other through struggles and celebrates achievements even when those achievements don't look like what you expected. Family doesn't exclude people for being different. You were never actually family to me. You were people I was biologically related to who spent decades making me feel unwanted. And I'm not interested in having you in my life now just because my success reflects well on you. So that's it?" Sarah asked, asked, her voice getting sharp. You're just going to cut us off forever because we didn't handle everything perfectly when you were growing up. That's pretty selfish, Alex. I almost laughed at the audacity of being called selfish by the sister who'd watched me be excluded from every family event for 15 years and had never once suggested they invite me. I'm going to close this door now, I said, and I'm going to ask you not to contact me again. If you show up at my home or my workplace again, I'll file a restraining order. We're done. We've been done for 7 years. You just didn't notice because you weren't paying attention to my life until it became publicly impressive. I stepped back and closed the door firmly, watching through the peephole as they stood on my porch in shocked silence, processing that their plan to reconnect had just been completely rejected. And as I walked back into my home, my beautiful home that I'd bought with my own success, filled with my research and my books and evidence of the life I'd built entirely without them, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Because finally, after years of carrying the weight of their rejection and trying to earn acceptance I was never going to receive, I'd done what I should have done 15 years earlier. I'd protected myself from people who'd proven they couldn't love me the way I deserved. And I'd done it on my terms, with clarity and boundaries and zero guilt about choosing my own well-being over their sudden desire to be part of my successful life. But the story doesn't end with that door closing, because my family, particularly my parents, weren't ready to accept rejection. And what happened over the following months would test whether my boundaries were strong enough to withstand their escalating attempts to force their way back into my life. Stay with me, because sometimes the hardest part isn't walking away from toxic family. It's staying away when they're determined to manipulate you into believing you owe them access to your life regardless of how they've treated you. After I closed the door on my family that evening, I stood in my hallway for a long moment, processing what had just happened. My hands were shaking, not from fear or regret, but from the adrenaline of finally saying everything I'd held back for years. I'd confronted people who'd hurt me consistently throughout my life. I'd set boundaries I should have set decades ago, and I'd done it without apologizing or softening my words to make them feel better. It felt powerful. It felt right. It felt like I'd finally chosen myself over people who'd never chosen me. But I also knew from my work with trauma-informed therapy, a requirement when you work with climate anxiety and environmental grief in communities, that standing your ground once doesn't mean people will respect your boundaries, especially when those people are family members who believe they're entitled to your life regardless of how they've treated you. I was right to be cautious. The attempts to contact me intensified immediately. My professional email received messages from my mother, all with subject lines designed to make me open them. Important family health information, urgent, please respond, about your grandmother. When I didn't respond, she started emailing my research assistants and colleagues, asking them to pass along messages. I had to send a department-wide notice asking people not to facilitate contact with my estranged family members. My father tried a different approach. He reached out to my PhD advisor from MIT, someone he'd met once at my graduation, which he'd shown up for after I'd made it clear I didn't want him there, claiming he couldn't miss something so important. Apparently he could miss it for Jordan's athletic events that conflicted with his attendance. My advisor, to his credit, responded politely that he couldn't facilitate personal matters and suggested my father respect my clearly stated boundaries. Jordan and Sarah took to social media, posting vague messages about family members who forget where they came from and success going to people's heads. Several mutual acquaintances from childhood who apparently didn't know the history reached out asking what had happened between us, having been fed a narrative by my siblings that I'd abandoned the family after becoming successful. I didn't engage with any of it. I'd learned from years of observing family systems in crisis that responding to manipulation tactics only validates them and encourages escalation. So I documented everything, continued blocking channels as they found new ways to contact me, and focused on my work and my life. But they weren't giving up. 3 weeks after showing up at my house, my parents appeared at a public lecture I was giving at a local university about climate resilience strategies. They sat in the front row, making direct eye contact with me throughout the presentation, clearly intending to force a conversation afterward. I saw them when I walked out on stage and felt my heart rate spike. But I'd given hundreds of presentations, including ones where protesters had tried to disrupt my talks on climate policy. I knew how to maintain composure in front of an audience regardless of my internal state. I gave the lecture without acknowledging their presence beyond briefly making eye contact during my opening scan of the audience. I presented my research, answered questions, engaged with genuinely interested attendees, and ignored my parents completely. During the Q&A, my mother raised her hand. I called on someone else. She raised her hand again during the next question opportunity. I called on a different person. After the third time I'd visibly looked past her to call on others. The moderator, a colleague who knew about my family situation, announced we had time for one final question question and specifically called on a student in the back. After the lecture ended, my parents tried to approach me during the mingling session where I typically talked with students and answered follow-up questions. My colleague Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who'd become a close friend and knew the full history, intercepted them smoothly. "I'm sorry, Dr. Chen has a tight schedule and needs to leave for another commitment. If you have questions about her research, you can reach out through the Institute's public contact channels." "We're not here about research," my mother said, her voice carrying. "We're her parents. We just want 5 minutes." "I understand," Rebecca said firmly, positioning herself physically between my parents and me while I gathered my materials. "But as I said, Dr. Chen is on a tight schedule. If you need to reach her, please use appropriate channels. Now if you'll excuse us." She escorted me out a side exit while other colleagues kept my parents occupied with questions. We got to the parking garage before I fully processed what had happened. "They came to my lecture," I said, still slightly in shock. "They sat in the front row and tried to force a conversation in front of my colleagues and students." "They did," Rebecca confirmed. "And you handled it perfectly. Professional, composed, completely denied them the drama they were trying to create." "Alex, they're escalating because ignoring them is working. They're trying to find situations where you can't simply close a door or block a number. You need to consider legal options if this continues." She was right. That evening, I contacted an attorney who specialized in family law and harassment cases. I explained the situation: 15 years of exclusion from family events, 7 years of no contact, my recent public success, their sudden attempts to reconnect, my explicit rejection of those attempts, and their escalating tactics to force contact despite my clearly stated boundaries. "What you're describing is harassment," the attorney said plainly. "They're showing up at your home, your workplace, public events where you're speaking professionally. You've communicated clearly that you don't want contact. They're ignoring those boundaries. You have grounds for a restraining order, though I'll warn you that family court judges are sometimes reluctant to grant them in cases where there's no physical violence or threats. What if it's not about physical safety but about protecting my professional reputation and mental health?" I asked. "Those are valid concerns, and we'll include them in any petition. But Alex, I'm going to be honest with you, restraining orders against family members, particularly parents, when the primary issue is them being persistent about wanting contact, those can be difficult to obtain. Judges often see it as a family dispute that should be mediated rather than a legal matter requiring court intervention. So what can I do? Document everything. Every attempted contact, every instance of them showing up uninvited, every message sent through third parties. Create a clear paper trail showing that you've communicated your boundaries explicitly and they've repeatedly violated them. If the harassment continues or escalates, that documentation will support a restraining order petition. In the meantime, I'll draft a formal cease and desist letter that makes your position legally clear." The attorney sent the cease and desist letter via certified mail to my parents and both siblings. It was formal, clear, and unambiguous. I wanted no contact with any of them. They were to stop attempting to reach me through any means, and continued violations of these boundaries could result in legal action including restraining orders. For a week, it seemed to work. The messages stopped. They didn't show up at any of my public events. I allowed myself to hope they'd finally accepted my boundaries and moved on. Then the media campaign started. My mother gave an interview to a local news station, framed as a human interest story about the emotional cost of success, where she talked tearfully about how proud she was of her daughter's achievements but how sad she was that success had changed me and caused me to cut off my family who'd always supported me. The interview included old photos of me as a child with my family, carefully selected to show us looking happy and connected. It showed my parents looking sympathetic and heartbroken. It painted a narrative of devoted parents confused about why their successful daughter had abandoned them. It didn't mention 15 years of exclusions. It didn't acknowledge that they'd never supported my career. It didn't include any of the real history, just a one-sided story designed to make them look like victims and me look like an ungrateful, success-obsessed child who'd forgotten her roots. The story got picked up by a few other local outlets. I started receiving messages from strangers telling me I should reconcile with my family, that I'd regret cutting them off when they died, that success was meaningless without family to share it with. Some were genuinely well-intentioned people who didn't know the full story. Some were judgmental strangers who felt entitled to lecture me about family obligations. I was furious. My parents had violated my privacy, used media manipulation to try to pressure me into contact, and created a public narrative that was completely false. My first instinct was to fight back, to do my own interview telling the truth, to expose their years of exclusion and emotional neglect, to defend myself against their lies. But Rebecca talked me down. "That's exactly what they want," she said. "They want to draw you into a public fight because any response from you validates their narrative that this is a relationship relationship conflict that needs resolution. If you respond, media will frame it as, he said, she said, family drama. If you don't respond, their story dies quickly because there's no conflict to sustain interest. So I just let them lie about me publicly. You let them embarrass themselves publicly while you maintain your dignity and professionalism. Alex, anyone who matters in your life knows the truth. Your colleagues know, your friends know, your professional reputation is based on your actual work, not on a local news story about family drama. Don't give them power by responding. It was good advice, though following it was harder than I expected. I had to watch strangers comment on my relationship with my family without knowing any of the real history. I had to ignore messages from people telling me I was wrong, cruel, ungrateful. I had to trust that the truth about my character was evident in how I actually lived my life rather than in how I defended myself against public accusations. The media story faded after a week, just as Rebecca had predicted. But it had accomplished what my parents wanted. It put pressure on me through public opinion, made me look bad to people who didn't know better, and created a narrative where they were sympathetic victims rather than people who'd excluded and diminished me for decades. 2 months after the media interview, I received a letter from my grandmother, my father's mother, who I'd actually had a decent relationship with when I was younger but who'd gradually distanced from me as my parents' narrative about me being difficult had solidified in the family. The letter was handwritten, several pages, and surprisingly honest. Dear Alex, I owe you an apology that's about 30 years overdue. I've spent the past several months since your MacArthur Fellowship was announced thinking about how I failed you throughout your childhood and young adulthood. I stood by while your parents excluded you from family events. I listened to them explain away their treatment of you as being for your own good or just how you preferred it. I believed their narrative that you were awkward and difficult rather than questioning why they were so uncomfortable with a child who was simply different from what they'd expected. I'm ashamed of myself, Alex. You deserved a grandmother who saw through the favoritism, who questioned why you were being treated differently from Jordan and Sarah, who stood up for you when you were being excluded and diminished. Instead, you got a grandmother who went along with your parents' treatment of you because it was easier than confronting uncomfortable truths about my son's behavior as a parent. I saw your mother's interview on the news. It was manipulative and dishonest, and I told her so. She tried to justify it as trying to reach out to you, but we both know it was an attempt to pressure you through public opinion. I'm disgusted that my son and daughter-in-law are using media manipulation rather than genuine self-reflection and change. I'm not writing to ask you to reconcile with your parents or siblings. I think you're right to maintain boundaries with people who've proven they can't treat you well. I'm writing to tell you that I see what actually happened in our family. I acknowledge my role in allowing it, and I'm sorry. You deserved better from all of us. If you're ever willing to talk, I'd welcome the chance to have a genuine relationship with you built on honesty rather than the false narratives your parents created. But if you're not willing, I understand that too. I haven't earned your trust or your time, and you don't owe me either one. I'm proud of you, Alex. Not because of the MacArthur Fellowship or the media attention or any external markers of success, but because you've built a life of meaning and purpose despite having a family that failed to support you. That takes strength and resilience that I'm not sure I would have had in your position. With regret and respect, Grandma Eleanor. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda. It seemed genuinely accountable. No excuses, no minimizing, no asking for anything beyond acknowledging what had happened. I showed it to my therapist. Yes, I was in therapy, highly recommended for anyone dealing with family trauma, and public success simultaneously. This is more accountability than most family members ever offer, my therapist Dr. Sarah Kim observed. The question is whether you want to engage with it, and what engaging would look like for you. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to reconnect with my grandmother because she's actually acknowledging what happened rather than pretending everything was fine. Part of me thinks she's still part of the system that hurt me and that letting her back in creates a doorway for my parents to try to force contact through her. Both of those concerns are valid. What would you need from your grandmother to feel comfortable having any kind of relationship with her? I thought about it for a while. I'd need her to maintain my boundaries with my parents and siblings, not passing along messages, not trying to facilitate reconciliation, not giving them information about my life. I'd need her to be honest about family history rather than softening it. And I'd need her to understand that I'm not going to pretend the past didn't happen just to make family gatherings comfortable. Those are reasonable boundaries. Do you want to communicate them to her and see if she's willing to meet them? I did. I wrote back to my grandmother, 1 page, clear and boundaried, much like I'd written to my mother years earlier. Grandma Eleanor, thank you for your letter and for the accountability in it. I appreciate you acknowledging what happened rather than defending or minimizing it. I'm willing to consider having some contact with you, but with very clear boundaries. 1. You cannot pass along messages from my parents or siblings, or give them information about my life. life too. You cannot try to facilitate reconciliation or pressure me to forgive. 3. If we have a relationship, it needs to be honest. No pretending the past didn't happen or softening history to make it more comfortable. If you can respect those boundaries, I'm open to occasional phone calls or emails. But I want to be clear, I'm not interested in being part of family gatherings or having relationships with my parents and siblings. They had decades to treat me well and chose not to. I'm not giving them more chances just because I'm now successful enough to be worth their attention. Alex, my grandmother responded within days. Alex, I accept all of your boundaries and I respect your decision about your parents and siblings. I'll never pressure you to reconcile or try to facilitate contact. If we build a relationship, it will be separate and honest. Thank you for giving me a chance I don't deserve but am grateful for. That was 2 years ago. My grandmother and I now have regular phone calls where we talk honestly about family history, her own journey of understanding the toxic dynamics she enabled, and my work and life. She's respected every boundary I've set. She's never tried to guilt me about my parents or pass along their messages. She's become the grandmother I needed 30 years ago, even though it's come late. But my parents and siblings, they're still trying, still finding new ways to attempt contact, still creating public narratives about being estranged from their successful daughter and sister, still refusing to accept that they're not entitled to access to me just because we share DNA. And I'm still holding firm. Because here's what I've learned through all of this. Family who can't love you properly when you're struggling doesn't deserve access to you when you're thriving. Success doesn't obligate you to forgive abuse. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is build a life so good that the people who tried to make you feel small become irrelevant to your happiness. Stay with me for what happened next, because the story takes an unexpected turn when my work puts me in direct contact with my family in a way neither of us anticipated, and how I handled that situation defined once and for all where the boundaries would remain. The unexpected collision of my carefully separated life and my family's life came 3 years after I'd closed the door on them, during what should have been one of the proudest moments of my career. My research institute had been selected to partner with the federal government on a major climate initiative, a 10-year, $500 million program to implement innovative climate resilience strategies in communities across the country. It was massive, prestigious, and exactly the kind of work I'd spent my entire career building toward. The announcement was going to be made at a White House ceremony, covered by national media, with speeches from cabinet members and presentations from the research teams involved. I was scheduled to speak about our research approach and implementation strategies. It was a huge honor and a massive platform for the work I cared about. I'd been preparing for weeks, coordinating with my research team, working with White House communications staff on messaging, feeling excited and nervous in equal measure. 2 days before the ceremony, I received an email from the White House communications director I'd been working with, Dr. Chen. We've received a request from Representative Jordan Chen's office to attend the ceremony. We understand he's your brother. We're confirming whether you'd like us to accommodate this request or if there are any concerns we should be aware of. My stomach dropped. Jordan had apparently been elected to the state legislature at some point. I'd been so disconnected from my family's lives that I hadn't known. And now he wanted to attend my White House ceremony, presumably to leverage my success for his own political image. I responded immediately. Jordan Chen and I are estranged and have had no contact for several years. I do not want him at this ceremony. His presence would be uncomfortable and disruptive for me during an event where I need to be focused on presenting our research professionally. Please deny his attendance request. The response came back within an hour. Understood. We'll handle this delicately. The official response will be that attendance is limited to essential personnel and invited guests, and that family accommodations cannot be made due to space constraints. This should deflect without creating any political issues. I thought that would be the end of it, but I'd underestimated my family's determination to insert themselves into my success. The day of the White House ceremony, I arrived early for final preparations and rehearsal. I was in a holding room reviewing my remarks when a staff member knocked on the door looking uncomfortable. Dr. Chin, I'm sorry to disturb your prep, but there's a situation. Representative Jordan Chin is outside the security checkpoint claiming he was personally invited by you to attend the ceremony. He's with 2 other people he's identified as your parents. They're insisting they should be admitted as your family members. The audacity. They'd been denied official access, so they'd shown up in person hoping to create enough of a scene that security would defer to a state representative's demands and let them in. They were not invited by me, I said firmly, my heart racing with anger. I specifically requested they not be given access. They're estranged family members who've been attempting to force contact despite my clearly stated boundaries. Please escort them from the premises and inform security that under no circumstances should they be admitted or given any information about my presence here. Understood. I'm sorry you're dealing with this today of all days. Not your fault. Thank you for checking with me instead of just letting them in because they claim to be family." The staff member left to handle the situation. I sat in the holding room trying to calm my racing heart and refocus on my upcoming presentation. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, and I wasn't going to let my family's manipulation derail it. Rebecca, who traveled with me as part of the research team presenting, came to check on me. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" "I'm furious," I admitted, "but I'm not letting them ruin this. This ceremony is about climate work that matters, not about family drama. I'm focusing on that." "Good. And Alex, the fact that they showed up here, after being explicitly denied access, after you've spent years maintaining clear boundaries, that's harassment. It's documentation for any future legal actions you might need to take." She was right. I made a note to follow up with my attorney after the ceremony. The event itself was incredible. The ceremony was held in the East Room, attended by cabinet members, congressional representatives, scientists, and climate advocates. I presented our research to a room full of people who cared deeply about environmental protection and climate resilience. The energy was electric, the response was enthusiastic, and for 2 hours I got to focus entirely on work I was passionate about without any thought of family drama. After the ceremony, during the reception, I was engaged in conversation with a senator who was interested in our implementation strategies when I saw them, my parents and Jordan, who'd apparently gotten into the post-ceremony reception despite being denied access to the main event. They were across the room talking to other attendees, and Jordan was pointing in my direction. My heart sank. They were going to approach me. They were going to force a confrontation in front of colleagues and political figures at what should be a professional event focused on climate policy. I made a decision in that moment. I wasn't going to run or hide or let them control the situation. I was going to handle this on my terms. I excused myself from the senator I'd been speaking with and walked directly toward my family before they could approach me. I wanted to control when and where this confrontation happened rather than letting them ambush me mid-conversation with someone else. "We need to talk," I said quietly when I reached them, my voice pleasant but my eyes cold. "Somewhere private." "Alex," my mother started, reaching for me. "We're so proud." "Not here," I interrupted. "Follow me." I led them out of the reception area to a hallway that was less crowded, very aware that we were still in the White House surrounded by staff and security. When we were in a relatively quiet corner, I turned to face them. "You were explicitly denied access to this event," I said without preamble, keeping my voice low but firm. "You showed up anyway and claimed to be invited by me, which was a lie. You somehow got into this reception despite being told you weren't welcome. This is harassment, and it needs to stop." "We're your family," Jordan said, his state representative voice attempting to carry authority. "We have a right." "You have no rights to my time, my events, or my life," I interrupted sharply. "Being related by DNA doesn't give you any claim to me. You excluded me from every family event for 15 years. You made clear through consistent action that you didn't want me in your lives. I'm simply returning the favor now that the power dynamic has shifted." "That's not fair," my father said. "We made mistakes when you were younger, but we've tried to apologize and make amends." "You've tried to force contact," I corrected. "That's not the same as making amends. Making amends would require acknowledging specifically what you did wrong, taking responsibility without excuses, and respecting my choice not to have a relationship with you. You've done none of those things. You've just tried to manipulate your way back into my life now that my success reflects well on you." "We're proud of you," my mother said, tears forming. "We always were. We just didn't know how to show it." "Stop lying," I said coldly. "You weren't proud of me. You were embarrassed by me. You told me repeatedly that I was too awkward for social situations. You excluded me from family events because you didn't want to deal with me. You didn't attend my PhD graduation. You dismissed every achievement I earned. You made clear through decades of consistent behavior that I was someone to be hidden, not celebrated. So don't stand here now and claim you were always proud. We both know that's false." "People change," Jordan said. "We're trying to do better." "No, you're trying to access my success. There's a difference. If you genuinely wanted to do better, you would have respected my boundaries when I set them. You would have accepted my rejection of your contact attempts. You would have done the hard work of examining your behavior and changing without expecting access to me as a reward. Instead, you've harassed me through every channel available, given media interviews painting yourselves as victims, and now shown up at my professional event uninvited after being explicitly denied access. That's not growth. That's entitlement." "So that's it?" my mother asked, her voice breaking. "You're just going to hate us forever. Never give us a chance to make things right." "I'm going to protect myself from people who've proven through consistent behavior that they can't treat me well," I replied. "That's not hate. That's boundary setting. And the fact that you're framing my self-protection as hate or cruelty toward you is exactly why we can't have a relationship. You still can't take responsibility for your own actions. You still want to make yourselves the victims in this story. A White House staff member appeared in the hallway, looking apologetic but firm. Dr. Chin, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to move you back to the reception. And I need to ask these individuals to leave. They're not on the approved guest list and security has questions about how they gained access. Thank you, I said to the staff member. Then to my family, this is the last time I'm going to say this. Stop contacting me. Stop showing up at my events. Stop giving media interviews about me. Stop trying to force your way into my life. We are done. We've been done for years. Accept it and move on with your lives. I turned and walked away, leaving them in that hallway to deal with security. My hands were shaking but my head was clear. I'd said what needed to be said without losing my composure or giving them any emotional satisfaction. Rebecca found me as I was composing myself in a bathroom before returning to the reception. That was intense. Are you okay? I'm angry that they turned what should have been a purely professional celebration into family drama, I admitted. But I'm also relieved that I said what needed to be said without breaking down or letting them manipulate me. They heard me. They can't claim anymore that they don't understand why I won't have contact with them. Good. And Alex, for what it's worth, I watched you walk straight toward them, instead of avoiding them. That took guts. You controlled that confrontation instead of letting them ambush you. She was right. I'd handled it on my terms. And I'd done it in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. We were done. The reasons were clear, and their continued attempts at contact were harassment, not relationship building. After the White House ceremony, my attorney sent another cease and desist letter, this one more strongly worded and including documentation of them showing up at events after being denied access, their media manipulation attempts, and their continued harassment despite my explicitly stated boundaries. The letter made clear that any future violations would result in restraining order petitions. That finally seemed to get through. The contact attempts stopped. The media stories dried up. They stopped showing up at my public events. For the first time in 3 years since I'd initially cut them off, they seemed to actually accept that I was serious about maintaining no contact. My life returned to the peaceful focus on work and relationships with people who actually valued me. My research institute continued to grow. My climate work continued to have impact. My relationship with my grandmother deepened as she proved through consistent behavior that she respected my boundaries and valued me for who I actually was rather than for how my success reflected on her. For years after cutting off my family, 1 year after the White House confrontation, I got married to someone I'd met through my climate work, a fellow scientist who loved my intensity and my passion for environmental protection, who thought my awkwardness was actually just directness and honesty. My wedding was attended by chosen family, colleagues and friends who'd supported me through my growth and success, my grandmother Eleanor who'd done the work to earn back my trust, and people who valued me for who I actually was. My parents and siblings weren't invited. I didn't send announcements or post photos on social media. I kept this major life milestone entirely separate from people who'd spent my first 25 years making me feel unworthy of celebration. But somehow, probably through my grandmother, though she swore she'd never told them, they found out. 6 months after my wedding, I received a letter from my mother. Not an email or a phone call attempt, but a handwritten letter on nice stationery, much like my grandmother's letter had been years earlier. What that letter said, and how I chose to respond to it, would determine the final shape of my relationship with my family, whether the boundaries I'd set would remain permanent or whether some limited form of contact might be possible after years of consistent behavior change from them. My mother's letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, forwarded through my research institute's administrative offices, which meant she'd gone through professional channels rather than attempting direct contact, which was at least a small acknowledgement of my boundaries. I stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it, debating whether to just throw it away unread. But curiosity won out. I opened the letter carefully, prepared to see more manipulation or guilt-tripping or demands for access disguised as apologies. Instead, I found something different, not perfect, not fully accountable, but more honest than anything I'd received from my parents before. Dear Alex, I heard through Eleanor that you got married 6 months ago. I understand why you didn't tell us or invite us. I'm writing not to guilt you about that choice or to demand an explanation, but to acknowledge that we earned our exclusion through decades of excluding you. Your grandmother has been in regular contact with you for the past few years, and she's shared some of her own journey of understanding how badly we failed you as parents. Those conversations have been difficult but necessary. She's made me see patterns I spent your entire childhood denying or justifying. I've been in therapy for the past 2 years, not because I'm hoping it will make you forgive me or give us access to your life, but because I needed to understand why I treated my own child so poorly and how to prevent myself from perpetuating those patterns with grandchildren if Jordan or Sarah ever have them. Through therapy, I've come to understand understand some hard truths. I was embarrassed by you not because there was anything actually wrong with you, but because you didn't fit my narrow, rigid expectations of what a daughter should be. You were intelligent and intense and passionate about things I didn't understand, and instead of celebrating those qualities, I saw them as defects. I labeled you awkward and embarrassing, rather than examining why I was so uncomfortable with a child who was simply different from what I'd expected. I excluded you from family events not because you would have been uncomfortable, but because I would have been uncomfortable explaining you to other family members or managing their questions about why you were like that. I prioritized my own social comfort over your need to be included in family. I favored Jordan and Sarah not because they were objectively better children, but because they were easier. They fit expectations. They didn't challenge my assumptions. They allowed me to feel like a successful parent without doing any difficult work. You required me to grow and adapt, and I wasn't willing to do that. I dismissed your achievements not because they weren't impressive, but because they made me feel inadequate. Watching you succeed without my support forced me to confront that I'd failed you, and I handled that discomfort by minimizing your accomplishments rather than acknowledging my failures. When you cut us off and became publicly successful, I responded with manipulation, showing up at your events, giving media interviews, trying to force contact, not because I genuinely changed or wanted a real relationship, but because I wanted to claim some credit for your success and avoid the social embarrassment of people knowing you didn't want contact with us. I'm ashamed of all of it, Alex. I'm ashamed that it took you completely removing yourself from my life for me to examine my behavior. I'm ashamed that I needed years of therapy to understand what should have been obvious, that I treated my own child cruelly and justified it through labels and excuses. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect reconciliation. I'm not asking for contact or access to your life. I'm simply writing to say, I see now what I did. I understand why you made the choice you made. And I'm sorry, genuinely, specifically, without excuses, for every time I made you feel unwanted, inadequate, or embarrassing when you were actually brilliant and accomplished and deserving of celebration. I hope your marriage is happy. I hope your work continues to have the impact it deserves. I hope your life is everything you want it to be. And I hope that at some point, you're able to fully release the weight of our failure and exist free from the damage we caused. You don't need to respond to this letter. I'll respect whatever boundaries you maintain. This isn't about me earning my way back into your life. It's about me finally, belatedly, taking responsibility for my choices and their impact on you. With genuine remorse, Mom, I read the letter 3 times, analyzing every sentence for manipulation or hidden agenda. It wasn't perfect. There were still traces of self-focus, still moments where she made it about her feelings rather than my experience. But it was more accountable than anything she'd ever said or written before. It acknowledged specific behaviors rather than making vague apologies. It didn't ask for anything in return. I showed the letter to my therapist in our next session. Dr. Kim read it carefully before responding. This is significantly more accountability than most parents ever achieve, she observed. She's naming specific behaviors, taking responsibility without making excuses, and explicitly stating she's not expecting forgiveness or reconciliation. How does reading it make you feel? Sad, mostly, I admitted. Sad that it took her until I was 32 years old to understand what she should have understood when I was 10. Sad that I had to completely remove myself from her life before she'd do the work of examining her behavior. Sad that we'll never have the mother-daughter relationship I needed when I was growing up. All valid feelings. Do you want to respond to the letter? I thought about it for a long time. I don't know. Part of me thinks I should acknowledge that she's finally being accountable. Part of me thinks responding at all opens a door I'm not ready to open. Part of me just wants to keep living my peaceful life without any family contact beyond Grandma Eleanor. There's no right answer here, Alex. The question is what serves your well-being. If responding feels like it would bring closure or peace, that's valid. If not responding feels like it protects your boundaries and peace, that's equally valid. I sat with the question for 2 weeks, discussing it with my spouse Devin, who'd never met my family and knew them only through my stories, talking through it with Rebecca and other close friends, processing my feelings in therapy. Finally, I decided to respond, not because I was ready to reconcile or rebuild a relationship, but because I wanted to acknowledge genuine accountability when it was offered, and because I wanted to close this chapter of my life with clarity rather than leaving things unresolved. I wrote a letter back, 1 page, honest and boundaried. Mom, thank you for your letter. I appreciate the specific accountability in it, and I'm glad you're in therapy working on understanding these patterns. I accept your apology for what it is, an acknowledgement of harm done, not a request for reconciliation. I appreciate that distinction. Many of the behaviors you described did cause significant damage to my self-esteem, my sense of belonging, my relationship with family. The fact that you can now see and name those behaviors is meaningful even if it comes too late to repair our relationship. I'm not not ready for any kind of ongoing contact with you. The damage was too deep and too sustained for me to feel safe in a parent-child relationship with you. But I want you to know that I've built a good life, surrounded by people who value me as I actually am, doing work that matters to me, married to someone who loves my intensity and my passion. The years of being excluded and dismissed by you were painful, but they ultimately freed me to become fully myself without worrying about whether you approve. I hope your therapy continues to help you understand these patterns and break them. If you have grandchildren someday, I hope you treat them better than you treated me, seeing their differences as strengths rather than defects, celebrating their actual achievements rather than only valuing what fits your expectations. I'm letting go of the anger and hurt, not because you've earned my forgiveness, but because carrying that weight doesn't serve me anymore. I'm choosing peace and moving forward with my life. I hope you can do the same. Alex. I sent the letter and felt relief. Not reconciliation, not restored relationship, but closure. I'd acknowledged her accountability while maintaining my boundaries. I'd shared that I'd built a good life without her approval. I'd released my own anger not as a gift to her, but as a gift to myself. My mother responded a week later with a brief note. Alex, thank you for responding. I respect your boundaries and I won't attempt further contact. I'm glad you've built a good life. You deserved that all along. And that was it. The final communication with my mother, probably permanently. Not a dramatic ending with anger and conflict, but a quiet closure where we both acknowledged reality and moved forward separately. 5 years after cutting off my family, 2 years after that final letter exchange, I'm living exactly the life I want. My research institute has expanded internationally. My climate work has influenced policy in multiple countries. I've published 2 more books, given dozens of talks, mentored young scientists who are now leaders in their fields. I've built a chosen family of colleagues and friends who celebrate my intensity and my passion. My marriage is strong and healthy, built on genuine mutual respect and shared values. My relationship with my grandmother Eleanor remains close. Weekly phone calls, occasional visits, honest conversations about family history and her own journey of understanding. She's never tried to facilitate contact with my parents or siblings. She's respected every boundary. She's become the family member I needed, even though it came late. My parents and siblings. I know almost nothing about their current lives. My grandmother occasionally mentions them in passing, Jordan's political career, Sarah's life, my parents' activities, but I don't ask for details and she doesn't volunteer them. They're essentially strangers to me now, people I'm biologically related to but have no actual relationship with, and I'm okay with that. Better than okay, I'm at peace with it. I spent the first 25 years of my life trying to earn acceptance from people who decided I was defective. I spent the next 7 years protecting myself from those same people when they wanted to claim my success. And now, I'm spending my life building meaningful work and relationships without any energy wasted on people who proved they couldn't love me properly. Recently, I was interviewed for a major publication about my climate work and life philosophy. The interviewer asked about work-life balance and what advice I'd give young scientists starting their careers. My answer surprised her. Protect your peace ruthlessly. Build your life around people who celebrate you, not people who tolerate you. And understand that family is the people who consistently show up for you and value you. That might be your biological family, or it might not be, and both outcomes are okay. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because you share DNA. Invest your energy in relationships that are mutually respectful and supportive, and don't waste time trying to fix relationships with people who've proven through consistent behavior that they can't treat you well. The quote went viral. I received hundreds of messages from people thanking me for giving them permission to set boundaries with toxic family members, sharing their own stories of exclusion and eventual liberation. Many were children who'd been labeled difficult or awkward by families who couldn't handle their differences. Many were adults still trying to earn approval from parents who'd proven incapable of giving it. My story resonated because it's not unique. Many people grow up in families that can't love them properly, not through dramatic abuse necessarily, but through systematic exclusion, dismissal, and favoritism. Many people spend their lives trying to earn acceptance they'll never receive. And many people eventually have to make the hard choice I made. Protect yourself, build your own life, and let go of people who can't treat you well even if those people are family. Looking back now at that phone call from my mother 15 years ago, it's better if you don't come to the reunion. I can see it was actually a gift. Not in the sense that exclusion is good, but in the sense that their rejection freed me from trying to be someone I wasn't. Being excluded from family events for being too awkward ultimately meant I didn't have to perform normalcy for people who couldn't appreciate who I actually was. Being dismissed as embarrassing meant I could pursue work I was passionate about without worrying whether it impressed my family. Their rejection, painful as it was also liberation. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so good, so meaningful, so full of genuine connection and purpose that the people who rejected you become irrelevant to your happiness. I'm Dr. Alex Shen. I was excluded from family events for being too awkward and embarrassing. I cut off my family when they tried to claim my success after years of dismissing me. I built a life of impact and meaning without their approval. And I've never been happier. For everyone watching who's been made to feel like you're too much or not enough by your own family, you're not the problem. You're just in the wrong audience. Find your people, the ones who celebrate your intensity, your passion, your differences, and build your life around them. Let the people who couldn't love you properly become a footnote in your story rather than the chapter that defines you. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you, drop a comment with your experience. And remember, you don't owe family who can't treat you well access to your life, your success, or your peace. Choose yourself, build something beautiful, and let the people who rejected you deal with their own regret. Subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and building lives that honor who you actually are. You deserve family, chosen or biological, who sees your value. Don't settle for less.